It's painted white with a red cross because it's a hospital ship. It was a private yacht that was given to the German government, and they put it out to use as a civilian Vietnamese hospital for women and children. So this is some of the little kids in their hospital beds with orthopedic injuries, maybe from landmines. And Red Beach was a secured area a lot of the time that people would go to get off the ship. So this was a time when the regular crew as well as officers could go. And these are some young EM-123s or whatever, tossing in a young ensign into the water, have a little fun with their superiors. And this was a launch coming back. So you notice we've got the women are in uniform. Yeah. Now that's a uniform that doesn't exist anymore, and I don't have one. I have a cover for the cap. That's all I have for the hat of those uniforms, but they were pale blue and striped. Ham radio was a big deal for patients if they could get to talk to someone at home, and I had that opportunity one time also. They called my mom ahead of time, said, no, you know, ham radio, you don't talk in sentences, you talk in paragraphs. One person talks for a while, and then the next person talks. And they said, talk about something important, don't talk about the weather. And my mom said, I have to talk about the weather. We had a tornado go through our town, take out 7 lives, all the churches, left all the bars standing. How do you get supplies at sea? Well, those great helicopters. And this is what our deck looked like after they'd been getting some of the helicopters, and you can see from all the supplies, and here's another there was another helicopter coming back there. Oh. Well, there it is, up here. And he's got a net down here. So all this stuff has to get unloaded and stored. What a job. Again, celebrate whatever you can and have fun wherever you can. So this young man on the right was the 4,000th landing of a helicopter on the ship. We had 10,000 helicopters land on the ship before the end of the year. And here you can see how we, a nurse dressed, the cap is on, Elaine, and we had our regular white uniforms. Someone painted this on one of the helicopters that came to us frequently. You find them, we bind them. USS Sanctuary, AH-17. This is taken on the pier or the wharf in Subic. So this bathtub here, it's a claw leg bathtub, Finucane style. It was painted pink. And we'd had the USS Vega did a lot of our resupplies and our refueling at sea. And one day the captain from the Vega went over to the captain of the ship. Now we had a captain of the hospital and the captain of the ship, but the captain of the ship always had priority over the captain of the hospital because that was the ship. That's where we were on. That was our building. And he said, I want to take 4 of your nurses over to lunch on the Vega. And so 4 nurses got chairlifted across from one ship over the waves to the other. So quite a distance in between. It was a little bit scary. I didn't get to go, but anyway, 4 of them did. And they said, what do you nurses need? And one of the nurses said, what we could really use is a foot bath because we are standing these long hours. And back in the States in the 60s, nursing hours were 8-hour shifts, 8.5-hour shifts. Now they're 12.5 standardly. But 12.5 hours standard, which is what we mostly did, was different. So they said, okay, we'll see what we can do. So what they could do was to go to Manila and buy a blue bathtub. And the ship's officers and crew on the Sanctuary said, well, we don't have water for a bathtub for people to be taking a bath. It's not going to be hooked up. So I probably have these in reverse order because the Vega delivered this, and then when we went to say they said, you can install it, but we're not going to get it hooked up. But the Vega made sure it was hooked up. So I'm here in this photo. And again, you can see the kind of uniform we had that when we didn't wear our white work uniforms. So what we did with this tub was once it was hooked up, I had a stateroom buddy that was 4'10", and just the cutest little Italian girl. We had Valerie put on her bathing suit, we put her in the tub, and she folded it full of bubbles, and then she could lift her leg out and make little signs and stuff. And we let all the crew and then Carmen pass through the nurses' quarters to the bathroom to see Valerie in the tub. And that's the only time our crew did that. We were the second crew. Some nurse in the third crew did fill the bathtub and use it, but I think that's the only 2 times that I know of that it was used. We were saving water. This was on a command change ceremony, and it just shows that everybody was in their dress whites. Whoops. Yeah. R&R. How many of you had R&R? You go someplace? Where did you go? Pardon?
Bangkok.
Okay. Bangkok. Okay.
Hong Kong, Yokosuka.
Hong Kong and Yokosuka. Sydney, Australia. Anybody
Wow.
go to Hawaii? Oh, a couple of you. Good. Well, I went to Hong Kong, so this is a picture on the waterfront in Hong Kong, little girl begging. I said this was my first exposure in life to real poverty. And so this is some of the boat people that were there. So you've got 2 homes. There's 2 different boats here. One's here, cooking. And I just was like amazed. I mean, a lot of Hong Kong was really beautiful, but the poverty was pretty amazing to me. And so, I guess, if anybody has some questions, we can maybe do that at the end. And
Yeah.
Karen's gonna take over here.
Thank
She
you.
has a great story to tell you.
Well, one of you asked me, how did we get, I mean, you guys were all drafted, or most of you, but the nurses really usually were not drafted. And so I was the permanent night nurse on labor and delivery at University Hospital at Indiana University in Indianapolis. And this was my very first job, labor and delivery. And fortunately, I was with an old night nurse who had been working there for 30 years. And she taught me everything. But, she had a family. And so I said, well, I'll work Christmas, you can work New Year's. And she said, that's great. So New Year's Eve, I ended up at a party. And another person who happened to be there was the Army nurse recruiter. And after a few adult beverages, she convinced me that I should join the Army and see the world. So I said, oh, well, that sounds pretty good. And then after 1 or 2 more adult beverages, she said, we've never had a nurse from Indiana with a guaranteed assignment for Vietnam. She says, I think you'd be great. And of course I said yes. So this happens to be from the newspaper, the photograph, the advertising so that they could recruit other nurses to go to Vietnam. And so that was one of the stories about that. And so about probably 4 or 5 weeks later, I was on my way to San Antonio to basic training. So you can see how quickly things move. 22 hours out of Travis, we were circling Saigon, Tan Son Nhut, and I'm sitting on the window seat, and so I look outside, and here's puffs of black smoke. And I looked out there, and I said to this colonel sitting next to me, I said, what is that? And he said, that's mortars. The Viet Cong are mortaring the Tonsanute Airport. And I said, do you mean where we're going to land? And he said, yes. And I said, I think I'm in the wrong place. And I guess at that time, it was what really convinced me that I was in the Army, in the combat zone. When we landed, there was another nurse who'd been in basic training with me who was on this aircraft, and so we went to the induction center, and I guess they figured out because I'd had 10 months of labor and delivery and cesarean sections, I should be a surgical nurse. And so I said, oh, okay. So we were assigned to the 3rd Surgical Hospital. And the 3rd Surgical Hospital was located in the middle of the 173rd Airborne Brigade. Do I have any 173rd guys here? Oh, I'll talk to you afterwards. Okay, so we were in the middle of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and their job was very important because they were located at that time on the outskirts of the Benoit Air Base. And of course, all the sorties in the South were flown out of Benoit. And so there was, oh Lord, there was 8 or 10, squadrons there. So it's a very important job that they had in terms of defending the airbase, because you guys know the Viet Cong would have loved nothing better than to overrun the Benoit Air Base, right? And so it was really critically important. Saigon was a very interesting city because, in fact, before we all got there, when the French were there, Saigon was known as the Paris of the Orient. And it had beautiful buildings and was a lovely, lovely place. And there was some of that kind of hung on. So you could see the skyline in the previous one, but then on the outskirts, you had, howitzers and whatever else. Okay. And then you had the flower markets. And since the 3rd Surge was about 30 miles north of Saigon at Benoit, we'd get a Jeep or a car and we'd drive down to Saigon. And we'd get our hair and our nails done. And we'd get flowers and bring flowers back. It was just amazing. It was such a dichotomy in terms of you had war and you had casualties, and then you had the city where you had all of these things that were available. And there's myself and my good friend Lee. I have gladiolus. I don't know what she's got, but I was just amazed. Here I am in Saigon, and here's gladiolus. And then we would go up to one of the bars up on top of the hotels and sit around and have a drink. And this happens to be one of our nursing colleagues, and then in the back is one of our surgeons. Now, let me just say a couple of things about surgical hospital. Let's see, is that? Oh, well, I had to include Vietnamese transportation, right? So the 3rd Surgical Hospital was 60 beds, and we received only battle casualties. So we didn't see malaria patients like Carol saw. We had only battle casualties, and so their mission was to receive, operate, stabilize, and evacuate. And so oftentimes, we only had patients for maybe 48 to 72 hours. Unless the wounds were minor, in which case we had 30 beds for ambulatory patients who were expected to recover and go back to their units. And so we'll see some of that too. So this is coming into the 3rd Surge by helicopter. And you see at the bottom what looks like a wild field out there. And of course, within 3 months, they had a helicopter gunship base there. And I mention that because it's critical to know the difference. That's the pre-op area. Notice all the sandbags. So we were ready. Now, this hospital had been there probably for at least 18 months. And so it wasn't like MASH with tents anymore. They actually had constructed buildings out of plywood and cement floors. And so it was closed in. And so you can see that that's the pre-op area. And the patients come in off of the helicopter pads from there. Surgery.
Tell them about the water.
Oh, we had no running water. At least Carol had running water.
Yes.
It was, it may have been rationed, but you at least had some. So, I mean, it was amazing how we did things. I mean, we had sterilizers that looked like 150-gallon drums or something on stands. And then what they did was they filled it up with water and then they lit a gas underneath it and sterilized the instruments. I mean, it was crazy. And we, of course, didn't have any PPE. Now, the nurses in the room all know what that is. That's from COVID. And then that you have protective equipment. So we didn't really have that. So you can see, you're going to see how we did things in just a few minutes here. That's Lee. And we did had a couple of inflatables. Now, at the end of my tour, which was in May of '67, they sent the third surge to the Delta. Because it was so bad down there, they took all the women out and put all male nurses into the third surge. And actually, one of the 9 nurses who died in Vietnam was killed at the third surge. Because, of course, it was white, and it had a red cross on the top. And so the Viet Cong used it for target practice. And, I mean, can you imagine? You blow a hole in it, deflates. I mean, it's tough. Been there, yes.